My name is Grace Leland, and on the morning my bakery finally opened, the world smelled like warm sugar and everything I had fought for. I was standing in the center of Morning Ember Bakery with a pair of silver scissors in my hand, the ribbon stretched across the entrance, just waiting for someone, anyone, to cut it with me. The lights I hung the night before glowed softly against the glass counters, catching the steam from the first batch of lemon tarts. It should have felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Instead, it felt like I was listening for footsteps that never came. I kept checking the door, pretending I was only adjusting the display, but every time the bell above it stayed silent, something inside me tightened. My parents were supposed to be here. They told me they wouldn't miss this day for anything. My sister, too. She once said she'd show up for the important moments. Apparently, this one didn't make the list. When noon hit, the street outside was busy, but my doorway stayed untouched. A message buzzed on my phone, and for a moment my heart lifted. Maybe they were running late. Maybe they were parking. Maybe Emily's promotion party starts soon. "You're coming, right?" I stared at the text as if it could rewrite itself. My hand slipped from the ribbon. The scissors tapped softly against the counter, the only applause I got. I walked back inside, past the perfect rows of pastries, and turned the sign from grand opening to open. Not a celebration anymore, just another business day. I stood there, in a space built from my own hands, realizing the people I thought I belonged to had chosen a different room, a different celebration, a different daughter. And for the first time I wondered if their absence was telling me something I had been too afraid to hear. The hours after my silent opening felt heavier than the morning itself. I tried to keep moving, wiping down the counters even though they were spotless straightening boxes that were already lined up perfectly. But every movement felt like something I was doing to avoid thinking about the truth settling in my chest. I had invited them weeks ago. I had reminded them. I had let myself believe they cared enough to show up just once. And still the only sound in my bakery was the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I unlocked the front door again, pretending maybe someone would wander in now that the ribbon was gone. A couple walked past without looking inside. A delivery truck rumbled down the street. Life kept moving, just not toward me. I took a step back from the doorway, feeling that familiar sting, the kind you learn to swallow because you've been doing it all your life. To distract myself, I walked behind the counter, brushing flour off my apron that wasn't really there. I opened the register, though there was no need. My phone lit up once more, and for a split second hope tried to push through. It was Oliver from the coffee shop down the street, asking if everything went well. I typed, "Great," then deleted it. Typed, "Quiet," deleted that too before settling on "still getting started." It was the safest truth I could admit without sounding pathetic. When I finally looked around again, the bakery felt different, like a room I had prepared for people who never intended to come. I set the scissors aside and reached for a fresh pastry, not to eat, but to hold, grounding myself with something warm. The lemon glaze caught the light, shimmering the way I imagined my family might have looked at me if they had walked through that door. But they didn't. And as the afternoons stretched on, their absence stopped feeling like an accident and started feeling like a pattern I could no longer ignore. By the next morning, the smell of coffee drifting in from the street should have felt comforting, but all it did was remind me how I'd grown up watching my family gather around Emily like she was the center of every room. Even as kids, she never had to try. People just seemed to orbit her. Teachers loved her confidence, neighbors adored her charm, and my parents, well, they treated her like she was proof they'd done everything right. I used to think it didn't matter that I could build something of my own without needing the same spotlight. But standing in my quiet bakery after the grand opening, they skipped. I couldn't ignore how those old shadows still followed me. I watched the morning light slide across the countertops, remembering the countless times my parents praised Emily for her promotions, her achievements, her potential. They'd say it with this mix of pride and certainty, like her success was something the whole family shared. When it came to me, the compliments were always softer, more cautious, almost apologetic. At least you're doing something you love, as if passion was the consolation prize for not being impressive enough. There was a time when Emily brought over a cupcake I made and told me she'd entered it into an internal company contest. She said it with a laugh like it was no big deal. A week later, she told us she'd won. Mom had hugged her so tightly the frosting smudged, and I stood there pretending it didn't matter. Emily promised she mentioned me in her acceptance speech, but no video ever surfaced, and no one from her office ever reached out. I learned not to expect anything from it. I walked toward the front window of the bakery and traced my finger down the glass, watching people hurry past with somewhere to be. Emily always had somewhere important to be, and somehow I had spent years believing that meant I should quietly step aside and let her shine. But now, in the stillness of my own shop, that belief finally felt like something I no longer had to carry. Business picked up a little during the late morning rush, but even the steady flow of customers couldn't quiet the echo of yesterday. Every time I rang up an order, I found myself thinking about the small ways Emily had woven herself into my work over the years, how effortlessly she managed to take pieces of what I built and fold them into her world as if they belonged there. It started harmlessly enough. She'd ask for a few pastries to take to her office, saying her team wanted to try something homemade. I believed her. I boxed everything neatly proud she wanted to share my baking with her coworkers. Then one afternoon a friend forwarded me a photo from Everjoy's marketing newsletter. Emily was in the center holding a tray of my pastries, the caption reading, "Creative samples made by our culinary lead." There was no mention of me or my bakery, just Emily smiling like she'd baked them herself. I confronted her once gently. She shrugged it off. "Grace, it's just internal content. It makes the brand look good. Your stuff inspires me. You should be proud." I told myself not to make a big deal out of it. Maybe I wanted to believe she didn't mean any harm. Maybe I was too used to bending, but the signs kept piling up. A vendor emailed me about a wholesale order I supposedly agreed to using a signature I didn't recognize. When I asked Emily, she laughed as if it were a silly mix-up. "I just streamlined things, that's all. You know how corporate clients are. Don't worry, you'll benefit from the exposure." That word exposure felt like a cold hand on my shoulder. I'd heard it too many times from people who liked using my work, but not my name. Standing in the middle of the bakery now, wiping down a surface that didn't need cleaning, I felt the weight of every moment I had let slide. Maybe it was easier back then to pretend it was all just support, all just love. But yesterday's empty opening made one thing painfully clear. I wasn't being supported, I was being used. That realization stayed with me as I closed up for the evening, the sky outside fading into a quiet blue. I scrubbed the last tray, letting the warm water run over my hands, and my mind drifted to the dinner we'd had a few weeks before the night everything inside me shifted just a little. It was one of those rare moments when my family actually sat down together, the four of us around the wooden dining table that always felt a size too small whenever Emily was in the room. She was talking about the new event she was organizing for Everjoy, describing it with that polished confidence she'd learned so well. My parents hung on to every word. Mom nodded with sparkling eyes, and Dad listened with that stiff-backed pride he saved only for her. Emily mentioned she might get the mayor to attend, said it casually like it was something she did every month. Dad's laugh boomed across the room, full of admiration. "That's my girl," he said, clapping her on the shoulder. Then he glanced at me as if he had just remembered I was sitting there. "Grace, maybe you could learn a few things from your sister. Promotion marketing, she knows how to get ahead." I felt the words settle over me like dust. Not sharp, not painful, just familiar, expected. I cut my food into smaller pieces and smiled as if his comment didn't land anywhere sensitive. The conversation shifted, but I stayed quiet, holding on to my napkin a bit too tightly. Emily flashed her new business card at the table, talking about her role in curating culinary partnerships and how she was experimenting with some new dessert concepts. She didn't look at me when she said that. She didn't have to. For a moment I wondered if my parents noticed the way my jaw stiffened, or how I stared down at my plate instead of joining the praise. They didn't. They never did. And sitting there listening to them celebrate her again, I felt something inside me sharpen. Not anger, not jealousy, just a quiet certainty that the space I occupied in this family was never going to change on its own. A few days after that dinner, the patterns I had tried so hard to ignore finally pushed themselves into the light. It started with a routine check of my bakery's email, something I usually did late at night when the ovens had cooled and the streets outside softened into silence. Buried between supplier invoices and customer inquiries was a forwarded contract I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Reconfirmation for Morning Ember Catering Partnership." My heart sank before I even clicked it. The contract detailed a catering partnership for Everjoy's upcoming event, promising dozens of dessert trays and customized pastries. My bakery's name was listed in bold at the top, followed by my old logo that I stopped using months ago. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It wasn't even close. My first instinct was to think it was a mistake. Maybe someone typed the wrong email or pulled the wrong file. But when I scrolled through the attached chain, I saw Emily's name. Her messages smooth and enthusiastic, talking about our bakery, our capacity, our signature recipes. She spoke as if Morning Ember was an extension of herself, something she owned, something she could offer freely. I sat there in the dim light of my office, rereading the thread until the edges of the words blurred. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't something she could brush off with a laugh this time. She had signed my business into a legally binding agreement without my knowledge. That was more than disrespect. It was fraud. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the faint ticking of the cooling oven in the next room. For years I had convinced myself that Emily's actions came from carelessness, not intention. But this was deliberate. Calculated. She didn't even think she needed my permission. A strange calm settled over me then. Not rage, not sadness, just clarity. I opened a new folder on my laptop, titled it Everjoy Documents, and began dragging every email, every invoice, every questionable message into it. For the first time, I wasn't cleaning up after her. I was preparing. 2 days passed before anything happened. I spent both mornings pretending everything was normal, selling croissants, wiping counters, answering customers with the same gentle voice I always used. But inside I was waiting for the moment the quiet would finally break. It came on a Thursday, just after the lunch rush, when my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something in my chest tightened and I answered anyway. The voice on the other end was clipped professional, too practiced to belong to a friend. "Miss Leland, this is Karen Soto from Everjoy Hospitality Group. I'd like to discuss a matter involving your bakery." The way she said your bakery told me she already knew the truth. I stepped into the back room, leaning against the stainless steel table as she continued. Her tone was polite but firm as she explained there had been a review of internal communications that concerns had been raised about misrepresentation and unauthorized contracts connected to my business name. She never said Emily's name directly. Not at first, but the silence between her sentences made the implication unmistakable. "We've placed the responsible party on immediate administrative leave during the investigation," she finished. "You may be contacted again if additional documentation is required." My breath caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. I murmured that I understood that I was available any time. When the call ended, I stood still for a long while, the cool metal of the table grounding me. Not 15 minutes later, my family group chat exploded. Missed calls, messages, question marks, frantic fragments. Mom asking if I'd heard anything about a misunderstanding at Emily's company. Dad demanding someone explain what's going on right now. None of them called me directly. They just threw panic into the chat and waited for someone else to clean it up. Then finally, Dad sent me a text outside the group. "We need to talk about the bakery." I stared at the message, feeling something I hadn't expected: peace. For once, I wasn't the one in trouble. I wasn't the one explaining. I wasn't the one apologizing. And when I told him he could stop by before closing, it wasn't out of fear or guilt. It was because I was ready. Dad showed up just before sunset. The bakery washed in that soft gold hour that always made the ovens look warmer than they were. I wiped my hands on my apron as he stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming once clear, sharp final. He didn't look around the shop the way I hoped he might. He went straight to the point, his jaw tight, his eyes carrying more frustration than concern. "Grace," he said, "what happened at Emily's job? They're saying you sent something in. They're saying you—" He paused, searching for a gentler phrasing, but failing, reported her. I held his stare and didn't move. "I didn't report her," I said quietly. "I corrected what she did. There's a difference." He exhaled like I had inconvenienced him. "You know how much pressure she's under. She made a mistake. Family shouldn't turn on each other over things like this." That word family landed between us like a weight I'd been carrying alone for years. I stepped behind the counter, letting the distance speak for me. "Dad, she used my business without permission. She signed contracts in my name. That's not a mistake." My voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "She crossed a line and you all pretended not to see it." He opened his mouth to respond, but the bell rang again, this time harsher, urgent. Emily stood in the doorway, her hair messy, her eyes wide with panic and anger tangled together. "You ruined everything," she snapped before he could speak. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" Her voice cracked, but not from guilt, from fear. I stepped forward slowly. "Emily, you ruined it the moment you decided my work was yours to take." She shook her head, backing away as if the truth stung more than any accusation. "You just wanted them to look at you for once. You wanted to take something from me." My hands were steady when I answered. "No, I'm finally stopping you from taking anything else." For the first time, neither of them had anything to say. And for the first time, I didn't fill the silence for them.